Okay, so we're talking about vapes for a little bit. The reason is this. So in Portugal, they have this kind of vape that's it's almost like how weed vape used to work, where it heats the material enough to get the
Someone
stuff.
was telling me about this.
Yeah. And so it looks like you have these essentially cigarettes that you put into this little dongle, and then you kind of like just draw out of the cigarette. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like so now people use the word vape to mean like juice.
Right.
But this is like actually just normal tobacco. And it's a huge thing here, actually. You see everyone uses them instead of like the juice vape. And so I was thinking about this, like why is this a thing here and not in the United States? And then I was talking to someone else and I was like, I think that designing a vape that has the same kind of like social dynamics and let's say health effects of a cigarette is like the design problem of the century. This is what I claim this. Someone could argue with me on the internet. But you and I were just talking and you showed me this vape, and I want you to show the watchers, listeners at home, this is, and what you refer to it as a millennial vape.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Pitch me this vape.
Okay, so everybody younger than me, everybody that's a Zoomer, they all use like Elf bars or like Juuls or whatever. And
which are disposable, right?
Right. And and they're proprietary. I think I like these big, they're called box mods because like all the parts are like swappable. This one, I used to have a really cool one that was like literally an open source design where you could swap out like the chip on it and shit. But like this, I mean, I build the coils in the tanks. I make my own juice. Like I don't have to buy any proprietary stuff.
So you are a cypherpunk down to the vape.
I mean, it's open source vaping, bro. Yeah.
So you said you make your own juice. What does that actually entail?
So it's nicotine solution, flavor, propylene glycol, and vegetable glycerin. All of these things. Okay, nicotine solution recently last year became difficult to obtain. They introduced some regulations for mailing it in the U.S. through USPS, and then at the same time, every private mailer like at FedEx and UPS said they just straight up weren't going to ship these anymore.
Yeah.
So the day before this went into effect, I found out about it and I bought as much nicotine solution as I could. I bought more than I can use. It's going to oxidize before I can go through it. But hopefully.
So you are a vape prepper.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I mean, outstanding. I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can come up with some long-term storage solution. I have them in glass amber bottles.
Okay.
And freezer, and hopefully that drags the lifespan out a bit. But.
Very nice. Okay, so you basically mix up this stuff at home. And then what are the other parts that you mentioned?
Yeah. So inside this, behind the juice, there's a little column with a chimney, and inside of that is a metal coil with a cotton wick that runs through it. So it's like wire wrapped around cotton.
Okay.
And so you buy this wire, you buy the cotton, and then you can just assemble it by hand. And then about once a week, I'll swap it out. And this costs nothing. I spend $50 a year on supplies. And going from a smoker to vaping. It's suddenly I have a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the actual chipset doing in there?
So it basically just controls the electrical impulse.
Okay.
So you can control the wattage. It measures the resistance of the coil. And some people get really into nerding out about this shit. I don't really care. I just want nicotine, right?
The unrelated vape golf. That's really interesting. So tell me, is it possible for an Urbit to run on your vape?
Not yet, but we'll get there.
That's where we're gonna go.
Law, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love it. So clearly, you're committed to the life. I mean, that says a lot about your lifestyle, your beliefs. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering. So this is Sitful Hatred. I didn't even do the intro yet. This is Sitful Hatred. Can you do? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow, there we go. So it works. But I'm saying this is like what's the term? A metonymy or a simile, whatever. It's your lifestyle in miniature, or your beliefs in miniature.
It's embodying my principles.
Exactly. And so you're Sitful Hatred. You're currently working Native Planet, which is the hardware company on Urbit. And so I was wondering if you could kind of draw the line, this kind of stuff, bring it to the more, what we think of as computers. You know what I mean? How did you come up, what was your relationship with computers at an early age, and kind of how that informs what you do now?
Absolutely. So I would say I got into computers initially when I was about 10 or 11 because I had a math tutor who was like an archetypal nerd, I would say. Like got me into anime, got me into computers. This is around the year 2000.
Gateway teacher, yeah.
And and then after that, I got very into piracy and like learning, how to steal video games.
What years was
so
this?
This is early. I would say like 2000 to 2004 would be like this kind of window of my life. And piracy, I was absolutely all about like, torrenting and like learning, this is how I got into like how networking works. Like how does BitTorrent work? Like, this is a pretty big moment for me.
Don't you think that like nowadays, like torrenting, pirating, it's like young kids don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
really.
It's a shame, man.
And it is a shame because you have to troubleshoot so much weird shit. You're just trying to download some episode of, I don't even know. I forget what the first thing I downloaded was like a nudie picture. I mean, obviously, on like Kazaa, like line by line. Like, and in those days, it was like, Sports Illustrated. It wasn't even like, and you're just like watching it come through. But it's like, to do that, you have to like understand networking because you should get these errors. There's nothing you can look up. So I feel like it's kind of like kids have lost, like not doing that as like kind of like a whole generation kind of missed that.
Yeah, you hear these anecdotes about like younger people not knowing how a file system works because they just use phones. And like, I mean, there's younger people here that are clearly very proficient, but you don't have to deal with rough edges anymore if you don't want to. And, obviously you're not going to learn as much. But I dealt with a lot of rough edges.
It's kind of funny to think about that because I was like, I'm 40, so it's like this all happened a little bit earlier, but it's like, the average person who was pirating some internet, was pirating some music, let's say, had to understand some amount of like ports, like opening ports and this kind of stuff, which is just basic networking stuff that like the average person now doesn't have to deal with. So, so that was kind of like your intro into a lot of that.
Yeah. And I guess I was always kind of aesthetically drawn to like the hacker culture. We were talking about 2600 earlier, and I used to go to Barnes and Noble with my mom and always get that when I could.
But for people who are listening, and they don't are young, what is 2600?
So this still exists, but this is a hacker zine from like I think the earlier mid 90s originally. And I think it started out probably as just like text files on a BBS, but it's a physical magazine, and it was distributed through Barnes and Noble for whatever reason, and it has a lot of cool stuff. It has a lot
of like things of dubious legality. Actually.
I mean, there was like straight up instructions for doing things that are not legal, but also it had some like cultural legal commentary. Yeah, and, I still check it out once in a while. It's still a solid.
I remember, and it's a really aesthetically cool magazine because it's a small format. Just like I think. Do they have color?
So the covers are like
the covers are color.
Photo. Yeah, I think the insides are all.
And I remember every once in a while they like publish something in binary. Do you remember that? There'd be like just like a whole bunch of pages that was just like binary.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, I mean they did some really cool stuff and a lot of like hardware hacking stuff as well. Yeah. Okay, so you came up, you're like into that. Did you get into kind of like the ethos hacker, sort of like cypherpunk stuff through 2600, or?
So I think I was exposed to it through that, and then I was also aesthetically drawn, at the same time too, to the criminal hacker kind of scene. And by this, this is like early 2000s, so it wasn't as like professionalized and like hardcore as it is now. It was like other teenagers making remote access Trojans, right? Yeah. And so I messed a lot with those. I didn't do anything crazy with them, but I did get in trouble at school for installing Trojans on all the computers in the computer lab. So.
Wow, very nice.
But that was, it was. I just did it so I wouldn't have to do the work in that class, and then a bunch of other kids. I showed them how it worked, and then eventually, we were discovered, and I just showed them how to use a port scanner to find all the computers, so I didn't even get in trouble.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so a remote access Trojan is a thing you install on the target box that will open it up so that somebody else can come in and fuck with the process.
So I would just put it on the computers and then download other people's work and change the name and print
amazing,
it off.
Amazing. That's so good. Yeah, I don't think I was that proficient. But I mean, you mentioned the aesthetic though, that the like hacker aesthetic. It's interesting to think that there was that strong aesthetic connection.
Do you remember Hasta La Vista? Did you ever see that site?
No.
I don't know. There in the early 2000s, there was like this very distinct, very visual hacker aesthetic that all of these there were like this underground scene of websites that they all had. It was very derivative of like early 2000s kind of like Photoshop website templates, but it all had like, like matrix green binding.
Was this related to like the demo scene stuff or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's connections, but they're, adjacent to the kind of criminal hacking Trojan stuff. There's also like the scene like for wares, which is directly adjacent to the demo scene.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are all kind of like next to each other.
Okay, let's walk some people through what we're talking about. Okay, so and just jump in if I'm getting anything wrong. So basically, a demo scene is a visual program that runs generally at the beginning when something's loading, like a loading screen. Right. And usually they were done in an extremely resource-constrained environment. So it's kind of like a challenge to say, what's the coolest visual you can make in this extreme? I mean, and I forget what the resources we're talking about, like kilobytes, like very small. And so a lot of this kind of like 8-bit, or not even 8-bit, like whatever, like just sort of bit art in general, things that people think of as like hackery, come from the need to operate within those constraints, right? And a lot of times what would happen, and this is, I mean, it's sort of like corollary thing is like ASCII art, like that's sort of like just literally in the file art. And a lot of times what would happen is if you were downloading illegal software, whoever had cracked it, meaning had removed the DRM and basically pirated the software, would insert their own demo scene, their own stuff at the beginning to kind of mark who had done it, right? So there was this kind of this like aesthetic that went along with the piracy, right? I feel like that's kind of like the most direct connection between them.
So it does come directly from software piracy in the 1980s. So people would take commercial video games, they would break the copy protection, they would put them on a BBS, and then it became a competitive game between these people that were breaking the software, and they would repackage it. They would like replace the developer's studio name with like their group or whatever. And over time, this became more sophisticated. The copy protection became more sophisticated, so the crackers became like very, very good at these things. And I think probably in like the late 80s or early 90s, they kind of formally diverged. So these groups were made up of specialists, people who would crack the software, people who would distribute it to like distribution nodes, top sites, stuff like this. And then the people who made the art were the people that were making these demos. Yeah. And so they would put demos in the intros to like when you open the game or whatever, but they would also just do it and compete with each other for what kind of fancy effects can they do in these very resource constrained environments. And eventually this became like its own art form where there's it's not directly related to anything else. It's just people making demos and so I know that maybe there's probably smaller formats, but I think generally the tiny format is 4K. Oh wow! So literally a 4 kilobyte file that you open it. It's like a binary that's executing like on the metal on your PC, and it's rendering like 3D graphics. It's playing music, and it's like it literally. I saw this for the first time, when I was 12 or whatever, and I thought it was like streaming somehow from the internet. But I was like, my internet can't do this. Like, okay, so 4K. How big is the average website now? Oh, it's surely like a couple megabytes.
Yeah, megabytes. Yeah, and so it's insane that people were able to, and it's interesting you were saying that because it's like so much of that hacker ethos, culture, all this stuff came from this arms race between like enforcing intellectual property laws, circumventing them, whatever. And then it's like, and it was generative of all this stuff. And it's almost like if the constraints hadn't existed, it wouldn't have been as interesting almost. So it's at the time you're like, man, fuck these, there's that FBI warning, piracy is not a victimless crime. It's like, but really that was what generated the art. Because if it was actually not there, there would be no need.
Creativity always comes from constraints, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so these constraints are formalized now, like these are categories. And okay, so another interesting thing about the demo scene is that they, it's still going, it's still, its own little hermetic thing. They actually have a convention, I think in Finland every year called Assembly. So.
That's amazing. Well, it's funny because I think about that kind of ethos, whenever I hear someone complain about Urbit and its performance and stuff, I'm like, it's so much better than early, it's just like, it is, even in its state now, and it could be better, obviously. But it's sort of like, when you have constraints and you're like, I'm overwhelmed by these constraints, it's kind of a skill problem at some point. It sounds bad, but it's like, it's a design problem because you're not designing within the constraints that you're given. And so I feel like it's one of those things where people, this is where I'm like, old man yells at cloud Simpsons meme where it's like, kids these days, they're not used to constraints in computing in any real like way. So they're not used to the constraints coming from the actual platform, and so they're not used to like interacting with the constraints in a constructive way. Does that make sense? Which I think it's unfortunate because you can do that. I mean, obviously, right? Because like there's all these types of art that are expressly to like, you know, I mean, chip tune and that kind of stuff is like another example.
Right.
Where you're like, I'm only going to use, and like there's great musicians who have done that where I'm like, I'm going to make like Todd Rundgren, I forget the name of the album, but he made an entire album just using, I forget which sampler it is, but it's like one of those very basic like keyboard samplers, and it's all his voice in the sampler. It's the whole album.
Cool. Yeah.
It's like he could have done whatever he wanted, but he adopted those constraints, you know? And I just feel like that's kind of, people forget that can be very generative.
That reminds me of one of the projects we didn't quite finish it ahead of time, but we were hoping to show off here. Mopful from our company Native Planet made an app for Urbit called PenPy, and this is an app for interacting with a locally hosted LLM. So we built all the infrastructure for running an LLM model on our box, or any device running our software, and then an Urbit app that's like a chat interface where you can talk to the LLM. However, because it's we don't have a GPU, these devices are relatively small. It's slow, so it's a pen pal. You're waiting like a minute or two for a response. So embracing the constraint.
That's exactly what it is, and so it's an interesting way to think. Like, okay, so just to be clear, maybe people miss what you said, right? So, Native Planet creates these. I mean, I wish we had them, unfortunately. These beautiful hardware boxes where your Urbit runs locally. And what's nice about that is that you can run non-Urbit processes as a sidecar, is the term, next to the Urbit, and then have an API between the Urbit and your sidecar. And so the thing that you've done is made like an LLM that runs as a sidecar, correct?
Right.
That interacts with your Urbit over, I'm assuming, Lick, the protocol that Native Planet developed. So you have a local AI running on your Urbit box, which is amazing. But as you said, it's resource constrained because we don't have GPUs in those boxes. So you have a slower LLM. And so I think you've done the right thing, which is go, okay, well, what would you do if you had a slow, a not immediately, when you have a minute of latency with your LLM? Well, you adopt a model where it's more like snail mail, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I like that. That's very, very cool. Okay, so you worked on the PenPy stuff. What else are you guys demoing here? Like, what's the newest Native Planet?
Yeah, so the two kind of major things that we're announcing or demonstrating is we have two new models. So we have the Tellurian 2. So I guess last year at Assembly we demoed our first unit and shipped short a few months after that the Tellurian. Now we have the Tellurian 2, which is basically a more compact, more powerful version of kind of the same use case. And then we have the Callisto, which is a very small kind of like SoC, like a system on a chip, like very compact device, and it's about half the price of the Tellurian as well. So it's not as powerful, but very small, very low power draw, very portable.
And how big is it? Just
I guess like I don't know, like that, and it's very thin. I mean, imagine. It's a little bit bigger than like a Raspberry Pi board, but like and then inside like an aluminum enclosure.
That's amazing.
And then the other big thing that we've kind of been working on, myself and Nalix, the other kind of main developer at Native Planet, is we've rewritten GroundSeg, which is the software that we wrote for our boxes. And this is basically like a container orchestrator for Urbit. So it's software for managing Urbit chips and the sidecars associated with them and the networking to make them accessible to the public internet. And we try to make this as easy, as like intuitive as possible. We try to make it where you don't have to understand how anything works. And we have a custom networking backend that forwards the connections from the chips on your box to a public relay that makes them accessible over the internet from your phone or another computer or whatever.
I love it.
So we rewrote the entire backend. We made a new front end. It's very pretty, kind of looks like a Winamp skin was what we were looking for.
Very nice.
And and it's a lot faster. It's the original version was written in Python, which is single-threaded, so it's a little choppy. We rewrote it in Go, so we've got concurrency. Things happen much quicker now. So yeah, we spent the last couple of months kind of banging that out.
That's really cool. And so what's the setup flow? Like, just rock me through the setup flow. If you get a new Urbit, like, I'm thinking specifically like if you've used a Kindle a lot of these now there's like really good examples of like setup flows of things. So like, how do you guys do?
Yeah. So I guess we took inspiration from mainly like Umbrel and Chromecast are the two reference points we have, and Chromecast in particular for setup. So if you get one of our boxes, or if you install our software on a box of your own, which you're welcome to do, it's open source. You plug it in, and it will. If it does not detect an internet connection, it'll begin broadcasting a Wi-Fi network.
Okay.
Which is just default credentials, native planet. When you connect to it, you can go to nativeplanet.local on your device, your phone, or your laptop, and then configure it to connect to your actual Wi-Fi network.
Okay.
After which we'll restart the kind of server, and it'll begin serving an interface on nativeplanet.local.
Got it.
And if you navigate to that on your other device, you can upload a zipped peer directory that if you already have a ship, or you can paste in a key or upload a key file, and it'll boot a ship. It'll run it, and then the next step in the setup flow is I guess prior to that, actually, on initial setup. You can enter a registration key for StarTram, which is this networking backend that I just described that automatically forwards your connection to a public relay. You still maintain, ownership of your data. Everything is on your box. It's just that we automatically forward the connection to make it accessible without you having to know how to do the networking or how to set up a reverse proxy or whatever. It's totally seamless. You enter a password, that's it. And that's the setup process. You give it an internet connection and enter a registration code if you're going to use StarTram, and that's it. You boot a ship.
That's amazing, and that works. So everyone's clear with people who are first-time Urbit users, and if they're existing have a ship and they want to move it onto native planet.
You can run many ships as well. So we don't put any kind of constraints on you, and the boxes are they're like off-the-shelf x86 boards, so I'm not sure about the Callisto, but the other ones you can definitely upgrade, like the memory, the disk on your own.
Yeah.
The Callisto, I'm not sure because it's an SoC, so it might be welded or soldered on there.
Yeah.
But we're very enthusiastic about open source.
I love it. That's good that you can keep the same philosophy with the vape and the native planet box.
Well, I feel like a personal sense of grievance whenever somebody locks me into some kind of proprietary bullshit.
Yeah, and it's funny. It really is it's not even like an ideological thing to me. It's just like etiquette. You know what I mean? It just feels like rude. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's the way I think of it. This has been amazing. It'd be great talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
I think we'll kind of wrap it up now, but I was wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to where can people find your stuff? Is there anything else you want to tell them about?
Yeah, so we our website is nativeplanet.io. Our Urbit group is native, NATTYV/native-planet.
Okay.
And we also had some kind of promotional swag here. The self-hosting manifesto, or actually the formal title is Improvised Computational Munitions Handbook.
Beautiful book. I wish we had it here. We'll cut a picture in as well.
If you're not here at Assembly, you can request a copy of the PDF of it, which is at improvisedcomputationalmunitions.io. Sorry about the really long URL.
That's okay. That's great.
And it's a little manifesto we wrote, kind of outlining our principles.
I love it, and I've read it, and it's both beautifully laid out and everything in it. I co-sign 100%.
No, thank you
very much. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Boom.